Hello and welcome. I'm Cynthia Miller, and we are at Tangerine Sky Studios. I am on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, just north of Vancouver on the inlets. And I just wanted to show you my inspiration today, and then we'll get into painting one of my favorite fall. That's my inspiration. Looking up the seashell inlet, and there's a bit of blue, there's a bit of gray, lots of water. I always paint the water, always paint the ocean. But we're going to paint a pair of pears today. Now, these are very kind of Mediterranean feel to me. I love these bold colors for the fall. And I just, this sort of just appeared here. I used a piece of beeswax, just the end of a candle. And I show you in the video, and you can use paraffin wax as well. But basically, we put it on this side of the paper to preserve the light. And then we painted and we brought that sort of shape that happened into life. And the pears were always there, but the containers, the sort of baskets, I think they look a little bit more like a Spanish basket that you might find in Spain. Love the pear tree. So let's paint.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got a piece of beeswax and I'm pushing it down on the paper flat in crosswords strokes, parallel to the table that the pears are on. And then I'm taking the same piece and just pulling it diagonally across. My goal is to make it look like there is a wooden table that the pears are sitting on. I've got some colors figured out here, and basically we're just going to jump right in and put a layer of wet on the background. Now I'm using my hake brush, and it's pronounced a few different ways, but I call it my hake brush. Just starting to put some color on. Now this is a really rich red, and I've mixed it with some browns, and the colors are all labeled here. And basically just followed it around the pears to make that background, and you can see right away how that wax is acting as a resist. So what I'm doing is picking up the excess water around the frame, and then I'm just continuing to add more color with my hake brush and holding it up, letting it run down, letting it run across. I've got a smaller brush here and just sort of coaxing that paint to go in between the pears a little bit there. I want to bring the color right up to the lines of the pears and the leaves, and so I'm just playing with it, holding it up, letting it run, and all the while it's drying. And you can see on the left-hand side that the beeswax is really creating a pattern there. So again, just using a smaller brush, making sure that that fills in around, because I really don't like the white showing in and around the pear. I like to fill that in to the background sometimes. Not all the time, but this time. And just adding more pigment, taking off the water, holding it up, moving it from side to side, and just sort of letting it dry. Now you can take it to the blow dryer or hair dryer and make sure that that's nice and dry. Next step is to do basically the same thing for the table, but as you can see, it's a diagonal stroke. Again, we're putting a little bit more brown in the mix here, and bringing out maybe grains of wood, making it look like they're sitting on a table. Taking that small brush in there and making sure that the color goes right up to the edge of the pear. Adding a little bit more depth. The more layers you add to watercolor, the more depth you will end up having. And that's why we always start light and then just continue to add layer upon layer. It just naturally becomes a little bit darker. So the light is coming in on the left. I want to have more dark on the right. That's where I'm going to remember to paint the pear and the leaf and the shadow on that side. So as you can see, I'm just holding it up, letting it run one way and then letting it run the other way. You don't want it to fill up little pockets of water. You want to make sure that it all blends. Now I'm using more of a green than a yellow for these pears. They tend to be green first, and then they ripen up to this beautiful yellow color. And really what I ended up doing here was a really good exercise in darkening the outside and keeping the inside, the center of the subject, light. So that's what you'll see me doing, layer after layer here with this green, going around the outside, giving the outside the darker tones, and the underside and along where it touches the other pear, that's where the darker shades are going to be, and the inside tends to be the lighter. And so that's the part that's bulging out. Everyone knows the shape of a pear, and so it's sort of like in at the top and out at the lower part. So we want to just keep adding layer upon layer of the dark, and I end up working around this spot of light in the center that ends up being quite small after some time. And you'll see how it takes shape with every layer that I put on there towards the outside. And I mean, you could probably stop at any point here, but the whole exercise is to just continue to add those layers. Sometimes you pull up the colors to give that highlight a little bit more boost, and you'll see me doing that a little bit too. But it's almost like, why use such a dark color for a pear? But it really adds to the rustic look of it. And you know, not all pears are perfect, as you see in stores. They're sometimes very blotchy and have more marks on them. And these just seem like they would be in that color of being more blotchy and less perfect. I'm using the brown with the green to achieve that color, and then just using mostly brown for the stems. It's still wet, so it still blends a little bit. And just mixing up a darker green for the leaves here. Remember that the pear leaves are quite jagged along the sides, so I decided to just pull the color out from the center of the leaf and let the leaf shape naturally sort of evolve from the little spiky bits at the ends. I mean, you could draw that in, but I think if you just know the shape of the leaf and then just pull out each vein to that spiky edge, I think you'll be happier with it. So you got one line down the center and then just pulling out the darker green to the edges to give it a little bit of zigzag sawtooth edge there. And you'll see how it becomes so that you can outline it. So it's still a little bit wet there, and just bringing in more solid green. And of course the edges are darker, the center line is darker. You've got a little bit of light on either side of that vein, that center vein, so it looks like the leaf has that shape. And then of course attaching it to the stem. Just make them exactly across from each other. I think it'll look more natural for you. And And just deciding that a little bit at the bottom, a little bit of the crease in the pear needs to be a little bit more exact. Now we'll start the second pear and we'll come down with downward strokes, and this seems a little bit dark, but it's in sync with the shade of the other pear, and you'll see the upward strokes here, and so again creating the depth by giving the outside the darker tones and the sort of bringing them into the center so that there is some light in the center. So we work the pear pretty much the same way as we worked the first one. Make sure your first pear is dry before you start the second one. You don't really want them blending into each other. You want those hard lines there. And you want to be able to have the paint fairly wet, so that I usually say the first, second, third layer is blending the colors in, so you've got a nice background. You've already got like 2 or 3 layers of nice blended color. And then on the top 2 or 3 layers, you can start putting in more hard lines, and these look more like shadows. So the first, as I mentioned, first few layers that you put on are going to be soft, blended, wet, different shades, and just stick to the outside and bringing your brush strokes inward so that the inside of the container or the subject is always lighter. You can see how the direction of the strokes really make a difference too, by pushing it around the shape of the larger part of the pear. The tops where the stem attaches, that's going to be a little darker. Where it touches the table, that's going to be a little darker. And it looks quite dark, that shade, but it ends up doing okay because the colors always dry quite a bit lighter. So, and I didn't want this to look washed out. I wanted it to look rich and interesting. So you have to have those deep shades in there. The rich browns and reds mixed together, and the greens and the browns. Gradually it's coming together. And the more I do this, the more I see the shapes evolve in the baskets in the back. You can see that light and the resist of the wax, the resist of the paint, so it holds the white of the paper. It's interesting how that comes about, and sometimes you just sort of have to work with it intuitively to bring it out the best you can. But we've got another leaf here to paint, and we'll do the same where we just bring out the brush strokes right to the edge of the leaf and let those brush strokes dictate where the edge of the leaf is. We've got the general shape, but each little bit will go outwards. So just position your paper the best way you can so that it is easy for you to put those strokes in, because it is going to be a few strokes to get that done. Again, we've used a darker green. This one is a little bit lighter color than the first leaf because it is on the top, so it's getting more light. It looks a little bit more newer, fresher, younger, and so the green is a little bit more vibrant. We will put some brown on it as well around the outside, but basically this is the leaf that sees the most light. And you can see the darkness around the outside is creating that depth, making it look like the top of the leaf is coming up, or at least along the vein. And while your green paint of the leaf is still wet, just go in there with a little bit of the brown tones and take it along the edge, and it will blend in if it's wet. And if you need to add more water, then just do that. But it does look nice when you kind of blend in those edges. It's darker, but it's also blended. And then this is more the shadow work here, where you want to have a darker green marking up the leaf, because leaves are not perfect. There's lots of darker tones to them. And just leaving a little bit of the light to show through. Touching up the stems a little bit. There's a circle that the stem goes into. And then I took tiny, tiny little needle-like spots here. And you might recall what the surface of a pear, the skin is sometimes, looks like there's little pores, little needle marks. And so I did some here as well, the lower part of it. And I think that the light, the way the light shines, the way the colors work together, they look like two rustic pears. Now again, we're talking about the way the light comes in from the left and where I'm going to paint the shadow. And the color of the shadow is always an interesting choice. I usually paint something that is the same color as the subject. So a little bit of green, a little bit of gray, a little bit of brown. And I just kind of follow the line around where I think the shadow would fall, considering the light is coming from the left. Now I play with this quite a lot, and sometimes it needs to be played with quite a lot, sometimes not so much. I also used a tissue to help blend it, because I find that really works well, especially just a really light blend. And just getting the shape and the way that the light shows through is kind of an interesting process. But just stop when you're happy with it. There is a darker line around the bottom of the pears, around the subject matter, and then the shadow gradually gets a little bit lighter as it moves out. I wanted to put the look of the edge of the table. I wanted it to feel a little bit more grounded, and I think this does help by putting this straight edge across here. And you could even do a little bit more by following the grains of the wood, but I kind of like the effect that this ended up having. I'm going to go in and just outline those basket shapes. I do like the way that they just sort of appeared there, and we did a dish in another one. We do these classes every week, and we're always trying different things, but I like the way that the light shines through these as well as on the wall. It makes it look realistic to have these in there, sort of sitting in the back. And then of course we're going to have to add some shadow to the baskets as well, but we're just sort of filling in and making those shapes a little bit more distinct. Now I've got quite a dark color coming in for the shadow here, and what we're going to do is put my brush back into the water and let it blend out. We want that darker shadow to show up right immediately beside the container, and then let that blend out a little bit. And then I decided I needed more color in the lids, and I like the way this looks. It's coming along. The shadows are pretty much done. So that's pretty much it for a pair of pears. I hope you enjoyed that, and perhaps you can join us sometime in our weekly online classes. We touch the world all over with 2 classes every Thursday, and if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's Friday. If you're in the UK, it's in the evening, and we have a lot of fun. Hope you can join us.